Welcome back. In this video we are going to work on the bracer that goes on the lower arm. So going forward in the videos, I'm not going to spend the time drawing the art assets on video. We're going to focus on the rigging part, so I'm going to prepare the art assets ahead of time. So what we can see is we have the main artwork for the bracer body, we have the lines that go on top of it, we have the gem, and then the cuff part. So these elements, as we work with them, were easy to draw when they were located on the artwork that isolated the bracer, but we need to move them over. So we can do that quite easily if I go into my tool properties. So yes, I could adjust them with their peg and then they would permanently have their original origin point over there, or I can just move them over, which is what I'm going to do. So to do that, we'll see that we can choose Apply to Visible Drawing Layers. And what that will allow me to do is to make a selection. And I also am going to allow this action to be applied to line and color art, so I'll choose both of those options in my tool properties, and then I can just simply marquee or select that section there. We can see in the node view it did select all of those, and now I can locate them over onto the arm. So as we're doing this, one thing to notice is we can see how the artwork for the bracer, it just really needs to slide around, and just the main body of the bracer will need a deformer on it so we can adjust the curvature across the forearm, which will be useful when we are looking at it from different views, or if we want to create a sense of foreshortening that the arm is closer or further away from the body, etc. So those are things that we will want to be able to do with that, so we will add a deformer to it once we get everything all hooked up. So now I have positioned this over here. Now as we're going to set things up, so we have the cuff that sits here, and that needs to, so I made it to the scale of this view, and what we can do is we could add a deformer to it, which would allow us to shrink it, or just when we're using our animation tool and adjusting the peg, we could scale it in as well. So both would be options to work with. Probably just going to work with the peg option because it doesn't, well, maybe we will put a deformer on, because then if we did, though none of the views show it, but if we did want to put a curve on it to create a little bit of perspective of the arm is pointing to or away from the camera, so we'll add a deformer to it. The gem just needs to slide around. But the bracer lines and bracer body, these are things that we will probably want to set up and peg together, because when we look, that point between the point of the lines and the top of the bracer is always going to be in alignment, so they'll have individual pegs and shared pegs so we can work with it. And we will want to be able to cut them with the shape of the lower arm. That's the one thing that's nice about this particular bracer, is it doesn't extend beyond the confines or shape of the lower arm, so that's pretty good there. So the first thing that I am going to do before we add in our cutter and do all of that, we're going to create the deformer to work with this. And before I do that, just to get my naming conventions correct, I'll just Command or Control Shift P to add a peg. Got to push the right keys when I want that to happen. So now we have the pegs for that. We're going to want another peg right here for the bracer body that will be for the lines and the body, so I will add another peg that is going to be for that, and then all of the parts of the bracer here will want to connect to a single master peg, so I'll select those and then, wrong key command. This time it's just with them highlighted, Command P, it gives me a peg that selects them, and I figure I'm just going to let the pivot point for all of these line up with that. And the bracer is going to move based on the lower arm, so we will connect that, but first we will want to set all of our transformation points for these items as well, and we'll do that after we create some deformers. So if I click on the cuff, click on my rigging tool, I am perfect, I'm on a curve deformer, that's what I want for that, and I'm just going to pull across in that direction, pull back in this direction, and that creates my curve deformer. I do want to straighten that with it, so that now will allow me, when I'm working with it, zoom in so I can select it a little bit easier. So if I want to create any type of curve, I can do that. And if I need to make it smaller, I can do that as well. So that works out pretty good for that one. So we'll leave that set up. Now let's go into the body of the bracer here, and we will set up for that with our rigging tool. This time I want to use an envelope deformer, and it's a little bit annoying that it's behind. So before I do that, let's just I want to select this, go up, and we'll just, oh, let's go find that over here, lower body, right leg. Actually, we can just go lower body here and deactivate that. Okay. All right, so now I can see all of it. So we'll click on the bracer body, click on the rigging tool, this time envelope deformer, and I'm just going to just start dragging around. And then simply align all of these points. Oh, did not mean to create a new one. So that right there, by grabbing those handles, I will be able to adjust the curvature of the bracer. The lines don't ever seem to really change based on the model sheet, so we're not going to worry about applying that transformation to it. So we'll just treat those as separate. And the gem, we could add a deformer to it, but based on most of the views, it looks like all we have to do is just use our standard transform option to stretch it or rotate it as it moves around the arm, and then we adjust it Z space nudging to put it in front or behind the arm and the bracer as it moves around. So just in the interest of not adding complexity unless we need it, we can always go back and add it later. So we'll consider that done for that. Now, I can turn that back off. So now, if we look at the bracer cuff, we'll put its pivot point right here in the middle. Don't want to put its pivot point where, if we look at it, where the rigging tool option is, because otherwise then when we are trying to grab things or move it, it will often be grabbing that instead, so then that can become problematic. So we don't want to do it that way. Alright, so now we can go to the gem and grab and set our pivot point. We'll just put it in its middle there, and the lines, the bracer body, all of these, I think I'm going to just set them all up with the same. So by selecting them all at once, we can just set their pivot point right here, which I could have probably done that with the cuff as well. But the cuff is going to move a little bit more independent, so we'll leave that separate. So now we want the whole lower arm group. To control that, we probably should rename this. This will be my bracer master peg. So now we have that set up. And what we want to do is we want to now cut this. So let's see, don't have a cutter handy, so cutter, we'll add in a cutter. And we want to cut it based on, well, we want to do it by the auto patch of the lower arm. Because now if we put this in, we could cut each of these separately, but would make more sense, because these are working together, is if we have a composite. And remembering on a recent video that we do need to use pass-through composites when we're working on a rig character so our nudging works properly. So that was a major oops on my part for not doing that correctly in the first place. So now we have these two going into that composite, and now I can set up my cutter. And now when I look at the lower arm, we can cut and see we do want to invert cut. So we just double click on the eyeball. So if we cut it with all of it, we can see how it's now cutting it based on the perimeter, and then that doesn't work quite right for this view because we're missing the lines. So we can take a look at some options here. So if I just go into my thing, I'm just going to go grab some art layers here so we have some art layers to play with instead of trying to go and find them every time. So if we were to use the color art, we can see the color art extends halfway into the line, so then that doesn't work. So let's take that back out. But if we use the auto patch, put that in, we can see that it cuts it, but then we get the line on front. In front, not on front. Need to use the correct preposition. So that allows the auto patch of the lower arm. So I am going to lower arm AP, just so that when I'm looking at it, by the time I move things around, I may not be able to, say, find that and see that connection. So we can now see that connection is there. So that now sets the bracer up so that it is working correctly for this. Now if I go in and select the cuff, so if I want to make this now match this view, I can just simply grab So we can see the cuff should be a little bit narrower here. Pull this in. So now I'm matching the view that is present on that. And let's pull these pegs down here because those pegs are not going to be going to the master, but we should make it so it will. Let's put that back. So that should go. So when I grab this, I can now slide this whole unit. So if I want to slide the whole unit, I can slide it over so we can see how it's now creating that look. So if I want to be exactly there, let me just trying to see, okay, so we have the lines at the edge, the bracer or the gem behind, so that's what we want to set up there. So if I go back here and lower arm, pull that back. So it looks like the lines are pretty close. Now with this, we can just simply nudge it back one here and then reposition it. And that allows us to create the bracer on the arm. And if I want to just make this look a little bit nicer, which I kind of do, I'm just going to select that, just put a little bit of curve in so it starts to look like it's following the arm a little bit more. So with that, we have now attached the bracer to the arm. And if I select all of this, we can see that now the bracer is indeed moving with the arm. So we have set it up. And we can, if we create our different hand shapes, then we can have our different hand substitutions. And then as we do hand substitutions, that may change the width of the wrist, which then we just adjust the size of the cuff. So with that, we should be in pretty good shape. So good luck and happy animating.